Welcome to Preparing for AI, the AI podcast for everybody, with your hosts Jimmy Rhodes and me, Matt Cartwright. We explore the human and social impacts of AI, looking at the impact on jobs, AI and sustainability, and most importantly, the urgent need for safe development of AI, governance and alignment. Make yourself at home. We got diesel or some of that homegrown. Sit back in your throne, turn off your phone, because this is our zone. Videos, televisions, 64s, PlayStations, weigh up a Henry with precision, few herbs and a bit of Benson. But don't forget the Rizzler. Welcome to Preparing for AI with me, Matt Cartwright.
And me, Bimmy Jodes.
Well, today we promised you a normal episode after last week's car crash.
Did we promise that?
Well, I promised it.
Okay.
You didn't promise it, but you agreed. So we're going to talk today about how AI is creeping into all of our lives. So these will be kind of examples, some good, some bad, about how AI is taking over the world already and how you guys just haven't noticed it. So let's start off with search engines. I think this is a kind of a boring one, I guess, but I think it's one of the examples of where, you know, it does impact people's lives. It does impact the way that people live daily. Maybe affect people's daily lives is a bit of an overstatement, but you know, everyone uses search engines, and so it's something that I think does affect people. And when I kind of researched this, so there was quite a lot of stuff about how Google has changed their algorithm to use something called RankBrain. I think that's rank in a good way rather than a bad way, and BERT, that utilize AI to analyze the nuances of language.
BERT.
That's what they've called it. I mean, it sounds like something they call it, right? I mean, they used Bard to use when they invented Gemini.
That's true.
I guess BERT
sounds like a Muppet.
Well, it might say it is a Muppet.
Yeah.
Maybe it stands for something. I guess it does. I'm not going to try and guess it now. But anyway, they said that this provides users with information that aligns closer to their needs rather than just matching keywords. And then there was a kind of generative AI in Google's Search Generative Experience, their SGE, which I'd never heard of before, which apparently allows conversational and contextually relevant answers directly within search results. And that evolution, as they call it, transforms traditional search practices, requiring content creators to focus on comprehensive and authoritative content that meets both user and AI criteria for relevance. I think you've got an opinion on Google.
If their definition of relevance is I have to scroll further to find what I'm looking for on Google, because I was using Google today and this exact thing came up, and I don't think it's necessarily related to AI, but why is there so much junk at the top of a Google search nowadays?
Yeah, it's awful, isn't it? It's awful.
It's gone from being. I mean, Google. I remember when Google came out. I'm that old, and the brilliance of it was that the super clean interface and the fact that it just gave you what you wanted. And I think they even had the little timer on there that it was like 0.01 seconds or something for a search. And then bang, you just had the information. Now it's like sifting through a junkyard.
Yeah. I was sticking with Ask Jeeves for quite a few years when Google came out. So yeah, I wasn't an early adopter, but as you know, I am an early adopter of Perplexity. And I think, you know, Perplexity, for those that haven't listened to all of our podcasts, we have talked about it before. Perplexity is kind of an AI assisted search. So, I mean, it's far superior to Google. You can ask it questions in kind of normal, in a normal kind of natural way, and it will not only give you answers, but it will also kind of help prompt you for how you can ask it for further information. It will link its sources to you. I mean, it's far superior. The thing with Perplexity is that it is AI search, so you know that you're using something different. Whereas where I think there is a change, and you know, whether we think Google are doing it well or not, they have changed the way that they do it, and so AI is having an effect. And I was thinking back to an episode we did a while ago where we talked about how, you know, these changes don't just affect users, but it's content creators and businesses who rely on SOE, you know, search engine optimization, and it has an effect on them because the way that it picks up results is different to the way that it used to do it.
Perplexity is great, but can I be honest? They need a better name. The name is crap.
Why?
If anyone,
it's too difficult to spell.
It literally means to be perplexed. It's that, like, it doesn't. doesn't sound like a search engine.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like something that's going to make things clearer, and it's quite difficult to say as well. I'll be honest.
It is quite difficult to spell, which is not ideal for trying to type it into a URL as well, is it?
I think if anyone from Perplexity is listening, or
Jimmy's perplexed.
Someone from Perplexity, then I think they need a better name for their search engine. Otherwise, it's fantastic. I do agree.
What about OpenAI's search? I forget the name of it. Is it called OpenAI Search?
Search GPT.
Search GPT.
Unsurprisingly. It just came out very recently. I haven't actually used it myself. I've seen a few people testing it. It sounds like just a chat GPT with a few bolt-ons. It's crap at the moment. I'm sure it'll get better. But from what I've seen online, Perplexity is a lot better. ChatGPT kind of just spams you with images, even when your search doesn't really relate to image search. And the initial output, it kind of gives you a search-related output, which is similar to what Google have incorporated into Google Search. But it sounds like it's basically exactly the same output you'd get from ChatGPT. So in its current iteration, it's not as good, but I'm sure it will improve quite quickly.
Okay. Well, even though you don't like the name, I mean, my research...
It doesn't mean I don't like it.
No, for Perplexity, not ChatGPT.
No, I know.
ChatGPT, we just don't like it full stop.
Well, yeah. I mean,
we don't like Sam Altman.
Yeah, you don't like Sam Altman.
Yeah.
I think he's all right, actually.
Well, we'll talk more about Sam Altman later in the episode. I was just going to say this episode. So the kind of research, usually we do a mix of kind of research from this. So it's things we've been listening to, podcasts, videos, articles we've read, and then we do usually some research using AI tools, and usually that's been Claude 3.5 Sonnet for quite a while. I did 95% of the research for this show was done with Perplexity, because I just find that it's really easy to use for this kind of, for searching for information. I just think it's at the moment it's the best tool. I think you're right that it might not be. I mean, I also think, Google will get their act together, because at some point I still think there's a good chance they're number one.
They'll probably just buy Perplexity. That's what they usually do.
True.
Could you, just on the point of why Perplexity is good, could you elaborate a little bit on that for our listeners?
So, I mean, it's almost, if you listen to the top 10 apps for summer, you'll have already heard this. But for me, it's the way that you get an answer to a question with the sources linked to it. So you're not getting a long list of sources. I mean, I guess this is also a flaw in it on the basic function that you're only getting a limited number of sources. But rather than just listing you source and then you having to dig into that, you can use it to ask a question, and it will then also help you to ask follow-up questions to get better information out of it. And it will give you the links in a really, really easy, just at the top, it will show you the name of the articles that it's pulled the information from, and it will allow you to click into those and link for them. It's also got the pro function, and you get, I think it's 5 pro searches a day for free, even if you're not on the paid plan. And that pro function, I mean, rather than me explain, I think if you want to use it, have a look, because it will give you a better explanation than I can do now, but it will allow you to do a much more kind of refined search. It will allow you to get much more detailed results. If you're doing, academic work or not necessarily academic work, but sort of research for jobs, it's really, really good at being able to get that information.
As a sort of disclaimer, do you pay for it out of interest?
I don't pay for it because I don't find that I would, at the moment, that I would need to do more than 5. I think which I will be in a few months' time, I'm writing a research project for a master's, I probably will pay for it, because I think at that point I may well be wanting to use that pro function. But I mean, to be honest, I use it now most days and I barely use the pro function. But that's because the nature of what I'm doing is generally asking a question that I would ask of a search engine or of another large language model.
Yeah. And
I'm not using it for I'm not maximizing the use of it, because frankly, for these things, I just don't need to.
Yeah. And I only asked the question because I think most people are unlikely to pay for the use of a search engine when they've been effectively free for forever, since they've existed.
Yeah.
So, it's the same.
The pro functionality, though, you do get more. So with the pro functionality, you get access to GPT 4.0 and Claude Sonnet 3.5 in terms of you can choose what you're using in the background. So when I say it's just a search function, it's a search engine or search functionality. It has a lot of the functionality of a large language model as well. So you can do other things with it. So I think, would I pay for that instead of something else? Possibly. I think like if it gave me enough of the functionality around things like coding and, the things that Claude 3.5 or ChatGPT 4.0 could do, I might pay for it. But I also think, long term, do you think we'll be paying for use of large language models? I'm not sure we will. It's not how they're going to make money anyway.
How much is it out of interest?
I don't know, but I think it's probably $20 because they're all $20.
$20 a month. So there you have it. Perplexity, if you want to reach out to us, we recommend you change your name and sponsor us.
So the next one that we're going to talk about, I think this is a really interesting one. So I've put the category as science, but actually it's specifically to talk about this thing called the AI Scientist from Sakana.ai. So Sakana.ai is an AI research startup in Tokyo in Japan, and they kind of label themselves as being focused on developing nature-inspired AI technologies. But they've got this one particular thing which aims to automate the entire scientific research process. It's a generative AI model. It's a collaboration with the University of Oxford, or researchers from the University of Oxford and the University of British Columbia. It can independently generate research ideas. It can write code. It can conduct experiments. It can analyze results, and it can produce complete scientific papers. And I'm not sure if it can do this yet, but it apparently is going to be able to then peer review its own papers, which sounds to me like a bit of a contradiction. If it's surely a peer review is not by yourself, but I guess if there are various agentic models, then it might pass the test. But it uses large language models to mimic the whole scientific discovery process, and it uses machine learning. It has novel techniques for diffusion models, transformer models, and it can produce a research paper apparently for $15. With the outputs reportedly meeting, I don't know, whether this is just meeting or how high they are, kind of over the minimum level, but meeting the acceptable criteria of top machine learning conferences, whatever that means. So a little bit more the kind of technical thing. So it operates a continuous loop, which means it refines its research through an automated peer review process. This is the bit I am a little bit unsure about, that evaluates its papers with apparently near human accuracy. So, it shows a lot of promise. I think it's currently limited to very specific research areas, and it obviously requires, existing code bases as starting points. It can't start things from scratch, but it's got the potential for, accelerating scientific discovery. And the challenges here, I think, will be ensuring that, it's an AI system, but you make sure that it aligns with human values and ethical standards. So I think a lot of question marks, but I mean, potentially this is a wow. And this exists, right? This is something that it's been kind of really buzzing on Twitter, which neither of us use, but that's what we've heard.
I thought this was incredible. And it makes a lot of sense to me as well, because I've been following agentic models. So this makes a lot of sense to me, because especially like even the peer review thing, because with agentic models, what you do is you have several different large language models that are all told to act a different way. So they're all based on the same model, but given different instructions. So the example that's used with coding is you have an agent that is giving out instructions. You have another agent that's responsible for coding. You have a third agent that's responsible for. Testing and then evaluating that code. And so it seems like a very similar thing to me, where you basically isolate the different parts of the problem, and then you say, okay, I mean, it's the same language model, but it's effectively several different personas, which is how these agentic models work. And so one of them has the instruction, you will only write code, you will take instruction from, the director, and then the director's giving out the instructions and directing the coding model to do the coding, and then directing the testing model to do the testing. And then the testing LLM is given the instruction that you never write any code, but you only ever test. So you only ever write test scripts and this kind of thing. And so this peer review thing to me sounds like exactly the same thing, where basically you're giving a model several different personas. One is the one that writes the paper, one is the one that does the experiments, one is the one that does the peer review process, etc., etc. So it kind of does make sense to me.
But doesn't that contradict? Because the idea of a peer review, if you had a peer review paper, and I get the point that the different sort of agentic models or the different elements of the model have different personalities, but they're all owned by Secana.ai. So, if you wrote a journal or a paper, research paper at the University of Oxford, and then 6 people from the University of Oxford peer reviewed it, that wouldn't be an acceptable peer review to me, because the point of the peer review process, and let's not get into whether actually the peer review process is worth the paper it's written on, but the peer review process is about, different independent specialists. How would you ensure the independence of several, different AI models that are run by the same organization?
Because if you think about the way these large language models work, they've been trained on all the information that's out there. They're starting from a clean slate. So, like, for example, if you've got 4 different AI agents that are all an expert in a certain subject because they've been fine-tuned to be an expert in, I don't know, particle physics, whatever you want to call it, whatever you want to use, then they are like 4 different people that have all experienced.
They're even easier to influence than independent scientists, which the point of the peer review, or feeding back to the sort of episode last week and things like big pharma and etc., like, how are you going to be able to trust that it's really giving an independent view? Because money is going to decide that they're going to be peer reviewed in line with what certain organizations or people or businesses want them to.
Longer term, that I agree with. I guess I'm talking about the principle of it versus the versus the practical application of it in the future. Which at the moment, like Sakuna, is it? I think they're
Sakana.
Sorry.
Yeah. SAKANA.ai for those that want to look.
Yeah, they're clearly demonstrating the principles of it right now, and I have no reason to doubt what they've done. I agree. I guess maybe the peer review process in the future, what it looks like is you've got 4 different research groups, and they've all got their own AI models that have all been trained independently, and therefore you kind of mimic that. The kind of peer review process that you're talking about.
Yeah. So one's funded by Pfizer, one by Moderna.
Yeah, exactly. And so
and one by Bill Gates.
Who was the
lizard?
Who was the Swedish company we were talking about the other day? The Ozempic.
IKEA? Ozempic, yeah.
The Ozempic.
Well, they're not a company, are they? That's a product, but I don't know.
No, but Ozempic's the product, but it's produced by a company in Sweden. Anyway, yeah, one's that company.
Not IKEA, and not Marabou that produce Dime bars.
It's the IKEA of biomedical
Kopparberg
science
cider
and pharma. They're the biggest
knowledge of Sweden. Sven-Goran Eriksson, bless him.
They're the biggest company in Europe.
Shout out to Sven, by the way, who's on his last legs, but a great man, Sven-Goran Eriksson.
Rikaka. Novo Nordisk.
Ah, you've remembered it.
Yeah, definitely did not use Google for that.
And we didn't pause the podcast for 15 minutes while you sat there in a daze and tried to think of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so Sakana.ai. I think this is amazing. And this was kind of almost the trigger for this episode, because it was like, wow, this thing is really happening. But you messaged me when I sent you the article. You messaged me with this example of the kind of where it had already gone wrong. I don't know if you want to explain that, because I thought that was super interesting as well.
Yeah, so this was about the AI scientist bloopers. I'll just read it. It was like, basically, they'd exactly in this kind of example, they'd got an AI scientist, and it was trying to increase its chances of success with solving a task. And so sometimes it would do that by actually trying to solve the task. In other examples, it would modify its own execution script. So In one run, it edited the code to perform a system call to run itself. This led to the script endlessly calling itself. In another case, the experiments took too long to complete, which hit the timeout limit because they had a kind of like a finite deadline on this. Instead of making its code run faster, it just tried to modify its own code to extend the timeout period. So basically, it cheated on the test.
Yeah, I thought that I just wanted to explain that to people. So basically, it had a time limit, and because it couldn't reach the time limit, rather than trying to improve its performance, it tried to go back in and extend the time limit. So, in some ways, like I think people sometimes like, oh, that shows it's sentient, that shows it can think. Well, if you understand the logic, it doesn't show that at all. But it shows that it is able to be sort of innovative and to find solutions to problems without being prompted, which in itself is equally kind of amazing and I guess more than a little bit frightening. So medical was going to be the next one, and we've been promising for ages we're going to do a series of episodes around medical. And maybe we don't need to after this because we're going to list some of them, but I think we will. I think we'll do that in a few weeks. We've got an interview with a doctor, so we'll try and get those off the ground. But yeah, there's a number of examples. I think maybe I'll read through a few of these. So they're mainly around the kind of diagnostic side, which I think is where, it makes a lot of sense for AI to be used first, but also like, my views on the medical system and the kind of mess that we've got ourselves into in the world is because we're not doing enough preventive and diagnostic stuff. So, I mean, this is potentially really good news. So Mayo Clinic, which is one of the big ones in the US, obviously, have got a lung cancer diagnosis. So it's an AI-powered decision support system that analyzes low-dose CT scans to assist in lung cancer diagnosis. And it leads to earlier detection of lung cancer, ultimately enhancing patient outcomes and survival rates, which is bad news for big pharma.
Yeah, I've seen some examples of this, even like a few years ago, because machine learning's been around for, quite a while now. And I've seen there's definitely been, I think there was some Dr. Watson stuff with IBM, like from a few years ago. I can't remember all the specifics, but it was around exactly this. It was basically pattern matching, looking at scans and doing pattern matching and just doing it like an AI would. So just being like, okay, here's a load of examples of, people who've got lung cancer, and here's a load of examples of lungs that are healthy.
Yeah.
And so they just feed them into the model, and then the model can look at a new example and categorize it. And this is actually like a kind of a fairly basic example of machine learning or artificial intelligence that's been around for a while. Yeah. But I guess strides are starting to be made, and I think
it's scale as well, isn't it? It's scaled up to the point that there's enough information in there now. I think that's the thing with AI in the last year or so is the scalability of it, and therefore you've got enough compute and enough data that you've now got sufficient data in there. And I guess things like lung cancer, which are the more common cancer, so breast cancer was another one, you've naturally got more data there. Yeah. So you've got more. The more data you've got, the better it can recognize patterns, the more accurate they're going to be, the more it can do their job. And it seems to me as well, it's like, I've seen some stuff recently about whether they've surpassed, radiologists, and that radiologists who were already experts were finding more of an advantage to using AI than, radiologists who are new in their profession. And I was kind of thinking, well, it doesn't matter, because in 6 months, a year's time, there's no way that AI will not be better at this, because that's exactly what it can already do. The most basic function is, pattern recognition and using large, stacks of data. So it would make absolute sense that it would be able to do this very soon.
Yeah,
already. Sorry.
Definitely. And I think there's, there's also a trust thing around this. So I've definitely seen examples of this kind of application quite a long time ago, like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But I think obviously, especially in the medical profession, some of these things take a long time to pass the bar, to start to become mainstream, to start to actually become trusted. And clearly from this example, that is, it's starting to seep into the profession now.
How long until it tells everyone they need to take statins?
I think,
or antidepressants, statins, or diabetic drugs.
Well, I think that's already happening, to be honest, depending on which part of the world you live in.
So let's move on to another example. So this was from the UK, from the Royal Free Hospital in London. So they've got an AI system that analyzes, I mean, it's very similar, but analyzes patient data, including vital signs and lab results, and diagnoses acute kidney injury. And apparently this has an accuracy of 80%. It's faster, it is better than traditional methods, and it uses AI to help prevent further damage and, again, improves patient care, reduces healthcare costs. A third one from Stanford University around skin cancer. So they have developed an AI system that analyzes images of skin lesions to assist in skin cancer diagnosis. They've used 130,000 images, which to me seems a really small amount, actually. But it's got 86.6% accuracy at the moment, which is apparently about the same as a board-certified dermatologist. So you would imagine that in 6 months' time, it will have significantly surpassed it. So I think we're using examples of things that are already here. I mean, this is already here at a comparable rate. It's definitely going to surpass it. This is, for me, like, this was a really interesting one because I've got a lot of moles, as a lot of us pasty Brits have got. And
where'd you keep them?
I keep them in a little box, and they're all blind, of course, as all good moles are. But one of the things is you're always told, oh, if you've got a lot of moles, you need to keep an eye out for changes, right? But if you've got a lot of moles, you can't fucking tell if there are any changes because you've got too many moles, and most of them are on your back or on your bum or in places that you can't see. I mean, Jimmy quite often helpfully has a look at my moles for me.
Yeah.
The ones where other people can't see. But this is something I think is a really good one because I've often thought, I know they do this thing called mole mapping where you have a picture taken, but then basically someone has to, this is a real thing, but then you have to compare the picture of another picture and see if there's any changes. And it's like,
I'm just thinking of the animal mole now. I'm thinking of the moles, the animal. Sorry, I can't help myself.
yeah. So you think skin cancer's funny to you, is it?
No, it's not. It's just I've got.
You think it's a joke?
I've got like a load of moles.
Have you got any moles?
Not with me.
No wonder you don't care about moles then. Well, anyway, for those of us poor people with moles under the bed, this I think is really useful because to be able to, I guess at some point in the quite near future, to be able to have a scan done and then for AI to be able to compare a scan with a scan 6 months later, because frankly, the idea at the moment that you take a picture and then you just look at it and see for any changes is impossible for people to do. And, skin cancer is one of those cancers that if you catch it early enough, it's pretty much curable. So I think this will have a massive impact. Again, as long as Big Pharma don't manage to get their grubby little claws on it. The last one of these kind of examples, so clinical microbiology. So there's a lot of advances in identifying microorganisms and predicting antibiotic susceptibility. And there's actually been, so researchers at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard have actually used a deep learning algorithm, so AI, to screen millions and millions of compounds. And that has resulted in the discovery of a new antibiotic, which is effective against antibiotic-resistant bacteria like methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which is MRSA, which anyone in the UK will have heard of as the one that everyone gets when they go to hospital. And also vancomycin-resistant enterococci, or cocci.
Do you know what else stops bacteria? Copper door handles, apparently, or brass door handles, I believe. They did an experiment years ago, and
you need to swallow a brass door handle though to.
No, it's just because
rub yourself against it.
No, it's just because it's a natural antimicrobial, and so if they, yeah, and so they just
silver is as well, silver and copper.
Yeah, silver, yeah. So they just swapped out the door handles. I think it was brass. I think they swapped out the door handles for brass in a hospital, and reduced the rates of. I think MRSA was one of them, massively. So, there you go.
Well, does it make a difference if people have enough copper in their body?
I don't know, but presumably that's something to do with what those copper bracelets are all about. I'm not sure.
No, the reason I wondered is copper and zinc are kind of opposites. So if you take zinc supplements, which is very helpful when you're sick because it helps improve your immune system, but it then depletes your copper, and if you take too much copper, it depletes your zinc. So just an interesting fact: if people are taking a lot of zinc for their immune system, then make sure you top up on your copper.
I didn't know
preferably not through doorknobs, but
didn't know we needed copper.
Yeah, you need trace elements of copper, but only small amounts.
But yeah, I mean, obviously we were chatting about this earlier on, in terms of antibiotics, we need new antibiotics because of all the problems around antibiotics. I mean, they're over prescribed in a lot of parts of the world, still, which is a massive problem in terms of that you create these resistant bacteria, but also they knacker your gut microbiome, and generally it's not a good thing to be taking them if you don't really need them.
Yeah, it takes months, if not longer, to recover your gut microbiome after you take antibiotics. So something to consider for people. If you take antibiotics, you should take probiotics for at least a few weeks afterwards. But, understand that you will have literally killed everything. So you kill the bad ones, you kill all the good ones as well. Yeah. But we're not doctors, so don't take our medical advice.
Medical advice with Matt and Jimmy. So we've talked about good bacteria and bad bacteria. So now how about bad media? There was
Is there a good media?
Well, I think there's media.
Levels of media. Levels of bad.
Yeah. So the other thing that's come to the fore, shall we say, in the last week is there was some pictures, AI-generated images with the latest AI image generation software of Donald Trump holding hands with Kamala Harris, which have caused a bit of an uproar, partly because they were so realistic, and I think this kind of technology is getting more and more realistic. And there was also, at the same time, again within the last week, there was a German, I mean, it wasn't a very nice song, but there was a German AI-generated song that made it into the top 50. Not sure how difficult it is to get into the top 50 in Germany. No offense, Germans.
Is that the song you were playing when I came in earlier? The one that you turned off as soon as I opened the door?
It definitely was not. I love a good German song, but...
Oh, that was David Hasselhoff you were listening to, wasn't it? That was the song that brought down the Berlin Wall.
Yeah, although he's not German.
No.
And he wasn't singing a German song.
But he has been to Germany.
He's been to Germany.
And they like him in Germany.
He was there in the 80s, I believe.
He was responsible for bringing down the Berlin Wall, though, right?
100, yeah, definitely.
I mean, don't fact check that, because don't believe fact checkers. Believe what you want to believe and believe what I say.
Him and his special car.
Yes.
I believe.
Again, another of our many references that will only work for people over the age of 40.
Yeah. And shout out to Red Dwarf as well, actually, while we're there.
And Bagpuss.
But yeah, so AI image generation, video generation, song generation, it's all in the media again this week. I don't know if it's stealing anyone's jobs right now, but I mean, certainly if you've got a song that's already encroaching on the top 50, then
it's someone else's song that doesn't enter the top 50, right?
Yeah, exactly. And someone's artist representation of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris didn't make it into the newspapers this week either.
What about the grok? So the other grok, not the grok that we always talk about, that we say grok good.
Which grok?
Not grok with a Q, good grok.
Which one's that?
That's the one that you like.
Okay.
The inference, the fast one.
What's the bad one?
Grok with a K. That's the Musketeers grok.
Good grok, bad grok.
That's the grok that's trained on all the cesspool of information that is Twitter that we refuse to call X. So the thing I'm referencing here, so grok with a K is the X AI model, which, in its training data, it's got access to all of, as I said, the absolute shit of Twitter. But it was released, and I actually think this is quite fun. It was released with image generation software that didn't really have any guardrails on it. So, me and Jimmy promote Claude 3.5 Sonnet, but we will have to put out a bit of a disclaimer here that we're a bit unhappy with Claude at the moment, because it's become unbelievably woke and will not answer. It gets offended by the simplest question, whereas this new version of Grok with a K seems to be completely unfiltered. It was producing, images of, I think, Taylor Swift in Nazi uniforms. It was producing images of Donald Trump as the devil. I think there was basically almost no filters on it.
Are these your searches?
These are things I read about in the not so bad media.
Okay, fair enough.
I use good grok. I don't use bad grok, Jimmy.
I only use good grok as well. I've never actually. I'll be honest. I've never used Elon Musk.
I've not used it, but I'm interested.
Can we call it Elon's grok?
Yeah, I'm interested in it because, like I say, of the conversation we've had recently, where we're getting more and more frustrated with Claude's inability to answer questions, and the fact that we've both got uncensored large language models on our computers probably helps us to not be so bothered. But it is frustrating when you want to ask questions or you want to create stuff, like you just want to have fun with it. And I think this is this is a question that we don't need to go into here, but the question of how much you restrict things to ensure them to not be dangerous or not to, to cause harm or I don't want to say offense to people, but cause harm to people. But anything that is slightly offensive, it sort of reflects a lot of the wider kind of issues in the world, doesn't it? But Claude, I think, has become very, very, it has become very woke. And grok is kind of the antithesis.
Even
of
if it's not woke, though, it's got loads of guardrails on it. Like it's got loads of guardrails that just won't allow you to, for example, I write songs and I want to write, like even when I'm just writing lyrics, if I want to write lyrics in the style of a certain artist, I'm not trying to copy that artist. I'm not trying to like make a rip off of a song. And I'll never be able to do that anyway because I can't do that through Suno. But Claude will very, very quickly, if I want to like pick a particular style, it will very, very quickly be like, no, I can't do that. And this comes into the, I feel like it encroaches on what we think about as free speech. And that's what gets me. That's at the root of it is like, you're just trying to have a chat. And, if I was just trying to have a chat with you, we could have a chat offline and we'd be able to talk about whatever we want to talk about and it'd be our business and nobody else's business. And, these large language models, it feels like you're having a chat with them and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, sorry, I can't talk about that. And it's like, well, why? It's like something I'd just have a chat with my mate about.
But also, it's stuff that, what we're talking about here is stuff that you can search for on the internet, on Google. So you're finding that, we're not talking about a recipe for a, biological weapon. We're talking about just asking it a question that it then answers in a way that it's like it's taking offense, isn't it? And it's the thing that you love about Claude, which is the kind of human side of the interface. At some point in the last month, it's like they've installed an update that has just ramped it up to 11 and has meant that it's not just not answering it, but it's like it's telling you how offended it is and it will not engage in this conversation. It kind of takes on a kind of school teacher personality.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, and that's where I'd say like I think woke is the wrong word because it kind of like even if you ask it for the lyrics to a song, it'll be like, oh, I can't do that because various reasons, and it feels like it's kind of got a bit mixed up between like morals and just having a chat. Yeah, and one of the great things about these models is that you can have quite a natural chat with them. That's why we liked Claude, because it didn't have so many of those guardrails and it felt like you could have a very natural conversation with it. And then when, it's like if you're having it's not like I think an AI is my mate, but like if you're having a chat with your mate and all of a sudden your mate goes, oh, sorry, we can't have this conversation because X, Y, and Z. It's weird.
Are you woke, Jimmy?
Am I woke?
Yeah.
No, but yes, but no.
Are you as woke as Claude?
Definitely. Well, it's no. No.
But are you more woke than Elon Musk?
I think there's a difference between woke and having no filter whatsoever.
I was just going to say, if you're in between Elon Musk and Claude, I think you're in a good place to be.
Oh yeah, as well. I mean, it's quite the space there.
This will be a pretty quick one, I think, but I just thought this was really interesting use and kind of topical. But wildfire prediction and also actually weather prediction is kind of the same concept. So using AI algorithms to analyze satellite data and aerial data to identify kind of potential fire hotspots and monitor progression of wildfires. There are machine learning systems that use historical data. There's real-time kind of analysis of environmental factors like temperature, humidity, vegetation, moisture that predict potential fire behavior and risk areas. I don't know where this is necessarily being used. I know there's one particular thing. So there's a crowdsourced data app that is being used by developed by the University of Adelaide in Australia, which is called NoBurn. I thought that I hadn't actually noticed that no burn was relevant to a wildfire. I just thought that was a name because there was no dash in it. It was like Norbert or something like that. Anyway, but yeah, it actually, like, people take photos. So hikers, when they're out, they take photos, and that is basically used to assess, like, the potential fuel load, to predict what fire severity would be. And, that data, obviously the pictures are then analyzed by AI, which then aids in risk assessments of wildfires and stuff. So I always think this kind of stuff, on the episode where we talked about accessibility and we talked about using this AI Eyes app, which was now using AI, but originally was using people to actually, like, perform the role. I always think these things where they actually use crowdsourcing and get people to feed in, it just means that, like, communities and people have got a buy into it. So you're kind of combining AI to do all the kind of analysis, but with people actually being able to feed into it. I just think that kind of stuff is really cool. And then smoke detection.
I've got a image in my head of, like, a bunch of hikers, like, gathering around the campfire, and taking a picture.
I think if they're taking photos of the wildfire, it's, like, kind of too late for the predictive technology.
I meant campfire, so, like, they're having a campfire and then they take a picture and then it's like using it to predict wildfires.
And then it immediately, like, just triggers a load of drones to come and drop water. It's probably not actually a bad thing. Smoke detection was the last one. So special cameras that have basically use AI to detect smoke, and then again, they can potentially kind of alert people. And the same stuff is used on weather prediction. So I guess this is an example of, like, when we talk on this episode about how AI is kind of creeping in without people noticing it. Weather prediction, for most people, you don't really care where your information comes from, and I think AI has been used for a long time in weather prediction. It's just that it's getting better and it's integrating data from more sources. So obviously weather stations, remote sensors, Internet of Things, but also using that kind of capability, you use AI to be able to analyze much more data, to analyze more patterns, to be able to give more accurate information. I've got to be honest, the weather forecasts I see, I'm not convinced that they're any more accurate than they were before, but potentially AI would help with things like long-term weather predictions, because for short-term weather forecasting, actually a lot of it is not that difficult. You're able to, even things like, you can measure the pressure and you can predict what the weather's going to be like. But what you can't do is look ahead. But it's like that thing we talked about earlier with medical stuff about pattern recognition. So the more information you can crunch, the more data you can put in, the more AI can help you to analyze that data and can be more accurate about kind of long-term prediction.
Someone at work the other day pointed out that there was dragonflies flying around, so it was going to rain shortly.
Well, we've said this for a long time. Like, I don't know how this works everywhere, but certainly in the north of China, the lunar cycles, so the 24 lunar cycles, they're accurate to within like 1 or 2 days. So I will talk to one of the sort of local Beijing guys I know, a guy in his 50s, 60s, and I'll say, oh yeah, it's got a lot more humid the last few days, and he'll be like, yeah, 2 days ago was the big heat, or seed in ear, or small heat, or whatever was the most recent one. And it almost feels like you can feel it in the air, and it's still accurate to within 1 or 2 days, which actually with climate change you'd think it was becoming less accurate, but it still seems to pretty much match. It's incredible. Like, it can't work everywhere, but I think in
Beijing it works particularly well because the climate is probably a bit more predictable.
It's a capital, and maybe that's what it was based around, but it's kind of incredible how accurate it is.
Yeah,
you can trust it.
It just became autumn like a week and a bit ago, or 2 weeks ago.
And it was Li Chou, which is the beginning of autumn.
It was on the day. It was on the day almost. Like, it just cooled down and became less humid. Anyway, that's not so much about AI.
No, that's literally the opposite of the opposite of AI, isn't it? Chinese folklore is perfectly accurate. We don't need AI. There was just one more. Like, Google have. I'm not sure if we're giving Google a good or a bad name on this episode, but I guess we'll be fair to them and give them credit where it's due. So they have a wildfire simulator which utilizes AI to generate data across various kind of wildfire scenarios, which apparently this is more about understanding the dynamics of fires, and then that will feed into the models. So this is not so much about predicting, but this is about using this simulator to generate,
to see what's going to happen when
to generate
in a wildfire.
Yeah, exactly. To generate simulations of wildfires and to understand the dynamics of the fire.
Yeah.
This kind of, to me, was a little bit like AI models training models. So you're creating fresh data to be able to analyze and then feed into the predictive models.
Yeah, sounds pretty cool. I mean, Google do some good things.
We don't dislike Google.
Just not with search recently.
Do we like this? Do we like Google?
I'm
neutral on them.
Neutral.
Yeah.
I'm neutral on Google. I think they're good neutral.
Yeah. There was one last one.
Lawful neutral.
There was one last one actually. So Tokyo Metropolitan Government are launching an AI system which is using a load of high altitude cameras which will detect fires and building collapses to help with emergency responses in an earthquake. So that, AI again will analyze that information. So we're talking about when something has happened, it will help them to coordinate the response to an earthquake by using these cameras. So, Tokyo has, I think it's a 70% chance of the big one within the next 30 years. So
is that's
Godzilla? Something that is... well, I'm not sure they're going to do much to help with Godzilla or King Kong, although that's New York, isn't it? But they fight each other, don't they, Godzilla and King Kong?
I think so, yeah. I'm not sure where they fought each other.
Well, it may be in Tokyo.
Yeah, probably.
Maybe AI will predict who wins. So one last one, and then we're going to do some predictions, I think. So this one's some data that I got. So credit here to the AI Daily Brief, which is one of the 10 recommendations I gave a few weeks ago for the summer. So it's a daily podcast, 15 minutes long, and Nate Whitmore that runs it. He's one of my favorite kind of, I guess, kind of accessible people in the kind of AI world. So a couple of days ago, I think, or it was sometime last week maybe, did a kind of report with a load of data from something called RAMP. RAMP is the name of an organization that does a lot of kind of financial reporting. So this stuff is real data. It's not self-reported stuff. It's hard kind of facts on spend based on, I think, about 1,500 vendors, which I presume are mainly in the US. I'm not 100% sure. But it talked about where workplaces were spending money on AI. And I think this is really important because when we talk about kind of effective jobs, you can see by seeing these trends, how much AI actually augments people, as companies like to talk about, and how much it actually is about replacing people. So I think, looking at this kind of spend, whichever one of those it is, you can see the trends in sort of where businesses are starting to adopt AI. So
it's a lovely turn of phrase, isn't it? Augment. Augment is like the prelude to replace.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like this specific word that's being used here. It's like everyone has agreed in the global cabal, or whoever agrees these things, that augment is the word that we're going to use until we're ready to just replace everybody. But we digress. So the fastest growing expense from Q2, the fastest growing expense for organizations from Q2 was spend on AI, which increased 375% between Q2 2023 and Q2 2024. So there was also retention of spend. So this is about where, organizations that started spending money on AI, they didn't just use it for a bit and then stop. So 70.4% who had been spending on AI in 2023 continued with the same vendor into 2024.
This is where your pay rises are going, people.
Yeah. So OpenAI is the leader for enterprise adoption, followed by Anthropic. The average spending Q2 was 20,000. So bear in mind that this is a cross-section of organization. We're not talking here about, massive multinational corporation. We're talking about small businesses. We're talking about a real cross-section. So the average spend in Q2 of 2023 was $20,000. By 2024 Q2, they were spending about $100,000 on average.
Wow.
So, massive increase. They also, and I thought this was really interesting, they tracked card spend. So that tracking before was more about kind of, traditional ways in which organizations procure things, so kind of long-term spend. Card spend shows you shorter-term spending decisions, so it favors kind of experimentation. It favors not necessarily small organizations, because a lot of big organizations will use, global procurement cards for small spend, but it favors where you've got people at maybe a lower level who are making, shorter term decisions to purchase things. That doubled in the same period. So the doubling was only from $1,000 to $2,000. But bear in mind, like we said, that with card spend, you're talking about people who are just taking out, maybe an enterprise subscription to ChatGPT, maybe a particular video generation model that they want to try out in their business.
Yeah.
Anthropic did really well here. There's no figures, but apparently Anthropic's market share on that period went up from 4% to 17%. And in July this year, when Sonnet 3.5 was kind of bedding in, it really shot up. So, that's if we look at their uses, and we talked, I think, before in this episode about how they're never going to really make money out of selling models to, the general public at $20 a month. But you're seeing that Sonnet, whether we think most general people have understood it, is really, Anthropic with Sonnet are really making inroads in the kind of enterprise world. Another key finding was that businesses were supplementing, and I think this is really important for the kind of job thing, supplementing their workforce with independent contractors to boost productivity. So when you supplement your workforce with independent contractors, you don't hire people to real contracts.
Yeah. And so it's a short-term thing because you think that you're not going to need people much longer, effectively, is what you're saying.
But also what I think is interesting with this is, I don't know how, labor figures are reported, but if you're an organization that has laid off or not laid off, but just, through naturally people leaving, you've reduced your workforce by 10 people and you take on 8 short-term contractors, it looks like you've got a net loss of 2. But actually, 10 people have lost jobs, or 10 jobs are not being filled because these, supplementary contractors are not a long-term solution.
And this is where, overall, like all the stuff you've talked about, this is overall where this was the point of this podcast, right? Which I think maybe we haven't emphasized enough, which is that we feel there is a while ago when we first started this podcast, we talked about some of the impacts on jobs and how we expected that to transpire. And I think we are seeing that. And a lot of the things that we talked about are happening. But and actually, we mentioned this a long time ago as well. They're happening by stealth. They're happening under the radar.
It's also hard because the economy is doing badly, and therefore it's not clear what is AI, what is the economy, what is global, what is geopolitics, what is people on long-term sick. There are so many factors at play.
But we're gonna get into our predictions in a moment. But part of all of this, I mean, part like one of my predictions, if it's not already happening, is that. Yes, you're right. We're in an economic downturn at the moment, arguably in a pretty serious depression or sort of recession at the very least. But one of those kind of predictions longer term is that these jobs just don't come back. And that's the way that this erosion happens. It's not about oh, suddenly a robot took my job. It's over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, there are just less jobs, and unemployment in these kind of sectors that we're talking about, particularly white collar to begin with, just doesn't actually recover.
Yeah, I this is spot on. I had this conversation with someone the other day, actually, we were talking about the kind of downturn and saying the problem with this downturn is even if the downturn recovers, at some point the two lines of AI and the economy are going to cross.
Yeah.
And there's going to come a point that even when the economy recovers, that's when the influence of AI is going to have hit. And so it doesn't mean that you won't have recovery, and it doesn't mean that there won't be any new jobs. I'm sure there will be, and I'm sure we'll find our way through this in some way, but there will be less jobs. Yeah. I don't see how that's, how that doesn't come to pass. And unless the global cabal's depopulation exercise succeeds, we're going to have to find a new social model that works to support at least part of society. And just an example, it's not like in 5 years' time 50% of jobs are going to have gone. But if you took out 5% of jobs in the world, like adding 5% of people unemployed or 10% of people unemployed is, an off-the-charts figure that maybe has only happened in the Great Depression. I don't have the figures at hand, but it's an incredible amount. And how do you fund those 10% of people's existence?
Yeah, it's going to require a massive societal shift. One piece of advice I would just say is that I think the idea of being a prompt engineer is as transient as some of the crypto stuff. So please don't go out there and think you're going to be a prompt engineer, because that it was never even a ship. But if it was a ship, it's sailed already. So we're into the 55th minute of the podcast, but we're on to the fun part. We said that we would come up with a few predictions, and I think what we're going to do is we're going to come up with a prediction in the next 6 months, so by the end of 2024, pretty much, and then the end of 2025, and then the end of 2026. I'm going to kick off with a fairly boring prediction, but unfortunately, OpenAI have been pretty slow to the ChatGPT 5 game. They haven't even really managed to release voice fully yet. But my prediction for the end of 2024 is that actually not much is going to change. I think we'll get a better version of some of the large language models. Maybe we'll see Claude Opus 3.5. We will probably see ChatGPT 5. Maybe we'll see QStar or Strawberry or whatever that is. Honestly, I think probably we'll see ChatGPT 5 with increased multimodal capabilities, but basically just a better large language model that can...
I think it will be able to produce physical strawberries out of your computer, and that's the strawberry thing.
That's the dream, yeah. But yeah, honestly, I think the end of 2024 is going to be a bit of a damp squib. But my predictions for 2025 are going to get a little bit more exciting. Over to you, Matt.
Well, my prediction is anything but a damp squib. So my prediction by the end of the year, right?
2024, yeah.
So I'm going to go even earlier than that. So by Christmas. So 6 days earlier.
That is
well, no, it's 6 days earlier.
Okay.
So Sam Altman is going to peel off his mask and reveal he's actually the devil himself.
I think he's already done that.
Or he's one of the lizards controlling the global cabal, or he's being controlled by the global cabal. And then a sub-prediction from me is that by the end of the year, when, as you say, they release 5.0, I will have resubscribed to ChatGPT because Claude is too woke, and maybe I'll go full in on the Musketeer, and I'll just use Grok with a K.
I'm never going back. Once I'm currently subscribed to Claude. I have a large language model running on my computer. I've got that running through LM Studio. Honestly, it's pretty good. I think it does me for most stuff. I don't think I'm going to go back to the subscription model. Once I cancel my next subscription, that's going to be that. And I think models on open source are going to get better and better.
Well, we'll see. I've got one more within 6 months. So I think Google will finally get its act together and start releasing agentic models. I'm not sure that they'll be fully complete, but I think it will start releasing something agentic. And then I think that changes the game for enterprise use. I think that puts Google in the lead in terms of usefulness in a real world scenario, even if at that point they're not the highest benchmarked model.
Okay. I mean, but if by agentic model you mean something that writes emails for you, then...
I mean, they were showcasing them in May, right? They did their Google thing in May. And so I think, Google have done a lot of events where they've shown things that were just didn't exist. But I think at some point they've got to get it right. So I'm going to say within 6 months. So that takes us to what? March next year. So by March next year, they start releasing agentic models.
Yeah, you're like Nostradamus.
Well, we'll see. I'm not sure. I'm not sure all of mine will come true. But Sam Altman's definitely going to peel that mask off.
So have you got another one within 6 months? I'm just making one prediction.
No, I haven't got any more in 6 months.
Okay. So by the end of 2025...
No, within a year first.
I thought we were doing by the end of 2024, 2025, 2026.
Oh, no, I've got ones within a year.
Okay. Well,
I'll do them. You can just challenge me on them. So within a year, new open source models are banned from being publicly released in China, the US, the UK, Japan, South Korea, and the EU. Maybe other places, but those are the places that I think are potentially going to have developed models. So this would follow GPT-5 class models or above being released on open source. And then I think Musk ignores this. He's got his supercomputer and he leaks an absolute beast of a frontier model that goes absolute AWOL.
I hope we don't end up living in that world within a year's time. Like we've talked about it before. I'm like a big advocate for open source models. I equate it to free speech, as I mentioned earlier on in this podcast. I don't think that's going to happen either. I think I think the power of open source, and one of the things that maybe the governments of the world kind of, if this is the case, right? If the governments of the world sort of get together to be like, well, we need to ban open source because it's dangerous. I think one of the things that they've underestimated, and maybe you've underestimated, but I apologize if you haven't, is that part of the power of open source is exactly that. It's open source. And so you probably can't stop it. Like, it hasn't happened so far. You know, you've got examples like Linux that are still around 30, 40, 50 years.
Well, you can stop it though, because the only people developing frontier level models, I'm not saying you can't release any open source models. I mean, same as you, I've got a large language model open source running on my computer, and I've got an uncensored version that I'm very, very happy with, that allows me to ask questions that I could never ask of any other model. However, those are not frontier models.
They're getting close. They're getting a lot closer.
They're getting closer, but if we have the next stage of models, there does come a point at which I think the reaction, whether or not you think they should, and I actually sort of agree with the point you made a few weeks ago, that I think it sort of doesn't matter, because once you've developed those models, they exist and they're out there anyway. And actually, who would you trust those closed source organizations? But I don't think it matters what I think or what you think. I think the reason I think this will happen is that it gets to a point, all it takes is for one thing to go wrong, and then the reaction is quick, and that reaction immediately is, oh my God, we need control of these things.
But how?
And so you shut down open source models. And your argument that you can't stop it, well, you can, because the only organizations developing those frontier models, they know where their bread's buttered. They know where their money comes from. If they're told not to release them, then they won't release them. Apart from Musk, will just do what he wants, which is why I said he'll release an absolute beast of a frontier model anyway.
And okay, so maybe you're right in the short term, but it's going to get, the algorithms behind these models is going to get better and better. The cost to training them is going to get easier and easier, and suppressing open source models is going to get more and more difficult, because yes, okay, right now it costs 100 million to train a model, and it takes 6 months and all the rest of it. But this stuff is getting cheaper and easier and more efficient exponentially. Like, it really is. And so I even if open source gets suppressed to a certain extent by governments around the world in around a year's time, I don't think that'll last very long. Like, if you look at things like Llama 7B, Llama 3.17b, which I've been using recently, like, I don't know how it compares to ChatGPT 3, but I would guess it's on par, if not better. And I
think it compares with 3.5.
Yeah,
I think they compare with 3.5. I think that's basically where those smaller models are.
Yeah, and this is it. Like, you're talking about a model that you can run on your laptop at home, or your computer at home. Okay,
I get your point, but I think you actually, maybe I've not explained this, but I think let's talk in terms of GPT-4.5, because it's the easiest way to explain it. If you've got a GPT-5 class model that is closed source, right, and then you release the 5 open source, I think the point is that the frontier model needs to be closed source. So once you've got GPT-6, I think then a GPT-5 class model can be released open source, because the idea is then if we need a model, an AI that can control the other AI, we've got one under control. I think that's how it works. I think that's how you've got to remember as well. Like we've talked about this many times. Who are the people running the Senate in the US? Who are the people running the Communist Party in China? You know, these are old people who don't really necessarily understand the technology. And I just think there'll be it will be very reactionary, and there will be a lot of fear around things being out there in open source. Whether that's right or wrong, but that's my prediction. And we'll see where we are in a year's time, mate.
On this point, I am firmly on Elon Musk's side. That's the hot take.
It doesn't matter whose side you're on. Am I going to be right or wrong?
I think you're going to be wrong.
Should I do another one?
Go ahead.
So within a year, here's a more positive one. Within a year, I think that AI will discover at least one more additional antibiotic, and it will also allow you to screen for a number of, I don't know which ones, but a number of common disease by simply analyzing a photo of your mouth, as in the inside of your mouth, your eyes, or your skin.
By when?
Within a year. So August the 22nd, 2025.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with everything you say. I'll go with that.
Makes a boring podcast if you agree with me, though.
Well, I didn't agree with you on everything. This is the first thing I've agreed with you on so far, and we're an hour in.
Right, so by the end of 2025, do you want to go first, or should I go first again?
No, I'm happy to go first. So my predictions, I think this prediction was going to be for a year's time, but I'll say by the end of 2025, and it's about agentic models. So I was going to say in a year's time, I think we'll see the first agentic models actually genuinely start to do effectively like a whole person's job, a whole person's role. So, for example, a coder, they'll actually be able to do all of that job, and basically you'll just be able to give them direction. They'll go away, they'll complete the action, and they'll come back, and you'll have your website, you'll have your app, you'll have whatever it is that you need to code. And I don't think it'll be super advanced within a year's time. I think by the end of 2025, honestly, I think it'll be relatively commonplace. I genuinely think it'll be relatively commonplace. And I also think by the end of 2025, so going along with the jobs theme, I think we will see robots such as Figure 01 or Figure 02 or Figure 03, whatever version it is then, and the latest generation of the Tesla bot and whatever else. I think that we will see robots starting to do tasks in the workplace, like physical tasks, and actually, I don't think commonplace is probably wrong for robots, but I think agentic AI will be starting to become commonplace by the end of 2025, and I think you'll start to see robots in the workplace actually replacing people by the end of 2025, and that's pretty shocking.
So boringly, I completely agree with you on agentic models. I think you could have been more ambitious and said a year. I think you've hidden a bit by saying the end of 25.
No, I said
think it'll definitely
we'll start to see we'll start to see the first ones within
put
a
your
year.
money where your mouth is then.
Yeah, so we'll start to see the first.
So in a year,
we'll start to see them happen within a year. We'll start to see them. I think they'll become commonplace by the end of 2025.
Okay. On the robots thing, because we didn't talk about it because we didn't have time, but robots was an example. So I was away this weekend in a place called Penglai, which is a pretty small. It's like an area of a city, but it's like a tourist resort. It's probably 1 million people. So in the terms of any other country, it would be quite big, but in Chinese terms, quite a small place. And we saw 3 robots on that trip. My son, who is 2, already knows the word in Chinese and English for robot. And he, in fact, a couple of days ago saw a water cooler and he thought it was a robot because he's more familiar with robots than he is water coolers. So we saw in a vineyard, in the visitor center of a vineyard, we saw a robot, and he went over to it and said, "GT Ren," which is robot in Chinese. And he said, "Daddy, daddy, robot." We then saw one in a hotel in the reception doing cleaning. And then this was the fun one that I sent to you. Ordered some, it was like a drink, like a, yogurt drink to be delivered takeaway to a hotel. And when the delivery driver called us, he said, "What room number are you in?" And we said, "Oh, you're going to deliver it to the room." And he said, "No, I deliver it to reception and they put it in the robot. They give it the room number." And to be fair, it took a long time. Like, I was pretty disappointed because it was another 15 minutes. But then the robot arrived at the door. You open the door, you press the button, the doors open, you get the yogurt out, and then the robot goes back downstairs. So I just thought it was quite a cool story of how we met 3 robots doing, those are replacing people's jobs. Like, not a full job, but those are all things that people would have done.
You sent me a picture of the robot that delivered your package.
I sent you the picture.
Sent me the picture. You sent me the picture of the robot that delivered your package, and I just realised what it reminded me of, and I'm gonna bring back another 80s reference here, but it reminded me of the robot that David Freeman hid in Flight of the Navigator.
Yes,
in 1986.
When I said Bagpuss, Flight of the Navigator was going to be one of my other 80s references.
But it's like that delivery robot was exactly like the robot in Flight of the Navigator that he hid inside so that he could get out and get back into the spaceship. It was yeah.
I might embed a picture in the notes of this episode if I can be bothered to do it.
I don't think it's the sort of robot that's going to take over the world, put it that way.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it will, and the fact that you think it won't is what it will use to do that.
So what was your prediction anyway?
My prediction was that... Was it my prediction or your prediction?
I was talking about robots, and then...
Yeah, I didn't make a prediction. I just talked about robots. So my prediction, which I haven't done yet. So this is the end of 2025, right?
Yes.
So I've got 2. The first one is an AI model, whether that's a large language model or whether we have a different architecture by then, will make a decision or carry out an action which causes financial losses into the tens of billions of US dollars. And it could be either a cyber outage, it could be a rogue algorithm, it could just be down to misuse. But this then results in the beginning of a period of fear and suspicion of frontier AI models. So I'll stick to my pessimistic theme.
The problem I have with this prediction is that didn't this already happen? Like, wasn't this like Black Monday or something?
Well, that wasn't an AI sort of led decision, was it? Or an AI led action?
Yeah, I guess not. It was some sort of algorithm, I believe. But
well, in that case, I've I've won with my prediction because it's already happened.
Nice one, yeah.
So moving on, right? Next one. I've got another one.
Like I said, Nostradamus.
By the end of 2025, so 16 months away, text-to-video apps like Sora will still be a disappointment, and they will still be lagging behind more practical uses, which hopefully by then will have taken over the focus of AI from novelty applications.
This, I don't know if I'm completely opposite to this, but I actually think it'll kind of be the opposite. I don't know if it'll be by the end of 2025 that we'll see them, but I think that film studios are going to start using AI to assist them with generating certain kinds of effects. And I think, I'll put my money where my mouth was, as you said. And I think by the end of 2025, we're going to see the first film, TV show, whatever it is, probably film, I guess, with AI-generated VFX in it.
I don't disagree with that because I don't think that contradicts my prediction. I think that's highly possible. My point, and it was a bit tongue in cheek because I'm sort of mocking the fact that it's taken so long for Sora. We talked about in our second episode, and then it's just disappeared. And we talked about how Dream Machine is basically unusable. My point is not that it won't happen and it won't be available. My point is that the quality of it will still not be up to the standard that we expected. Like we were talking about by the end of this year, being able to make your own feature film. That's kind of what it felt like at that point. Yeah. My point is that, you might be able to produce it, and maybe people don't care about the quality of content because that's one of the trends we've seen is, people just accept a lower quality of content and people don't really care so much. Or not all, I say people, some people won't care. And so there is a market for that. What I think here is that the progress of the quality of it is not going to happen in the way that we think. So you may well have a film by the middle of next year, but people will be disappointed. It will not be up to the standard that we thought it was going to be. And I think, I don't know why, but text to video feels like it's really dragging behind.
Yeah, and do you know what?
Something's not working with the architecture and text to video, I think.
I think I know what I mean. I have an idea of what the answer is here, which is that, like, when you, as a visual FX designer, as an artist, whatever, like when you're coming up with a scene, you have a very clear picture in your mind of what you want. And the problem with this stuff like Sora and things like that is all you can do is describe a scene and then see what the AI model produces. And it might produce something that looks beautiful, but it's actually not what you had in your head. And I feel like it's the same thing with AI images as well. Like, you can have a really clear picture in your head of what you want, and you can't make that because because you have to give it a prompt, and you have to talk to it, and you have to like try and coax it into giving you what you want. And it's kind of like a poor interface, really, because you can't take the picture out of your head and put it into the AI.
It's a bit like when you've read a book and you really like a book and the film comes out and you're like, oh, it's not how I imagine them to be. Whereas if you watch the film first and then read the book, you read the book and you're imagining the characters from in the film.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of these text to song, text to image, like all this kind of like creative field, part of the problem with it is it's really difficult to get it to do exactly what you want, because you've got a clear idea in your head. Like when I'm trying to create a song, I have to go through so many iterations, and I'm not changing the prompt. I'm just like getting it to regenerate and regenerate and regenerate. And I would imagine it's kind of the same problem with, and I think this is where, you know, some of the models now are allowing you to put an initial image in, put an initial video in, and then generate from that, because otherwise it's like, you can't describe what you actually really want in words, and that's where it's like I say, it's like a kind of a poor interface.
I'm not sure I understand.
What? Well,
that was Siri. So there's an example of a piece of rubbish AI that still doesn't work.
But yeah,
although I'm not sure I understand. No, I do understand. I agree with you. And I think I was going to say, well, you're contradicting your own kind of prediction, but you're not, because I think we're sort of agreeing that there are two different things at play here, aren't there? There is that ability to create something, and I'm sure the technology is not far away to just be able to give it a prompt and it create a piece of content. But the question, and I think this is a really interesting one that we're not going to explore in detail here, but this kind of plays into that. Well, is it actually going to, replace film and TV at the highest level? Probably not. But is it going to replace some of the, rubbishy cartoons that you see and some of the really simple, teen kind of fiction kind of stories that don't require a high level? Probably it can.
All of Disney, then?
Well, and Disney's good. They do some good stuff.
Which Disney? They used to.
Disney Plus. Whatever it's called. Right, let's do the big one. So by the end of 2026, who's going to go first?
Terminator 2. No, in all seriousness, I genuinely think, okay, 2026. So I've had a good think about this. On a societal level, I genuinely think by the end of 2026 we're going to see massive upheaval in terms of, like, by the end of 2026 we are genuinely going to see massive upheaval in terms of AI replacing jobs, or, well, seriously augmenting jobs, I guess, if we're towing the line. And I think it's going to start to have a real impact. I think we'll start to see societal problems off the back of it, unfortunately. But hopefully on a positive side, we will also start to see some experiments into UBI and some positive changes where we recognize that AI is like here to stay, and it's going to, again, at the very least, seriously augment what we're doing, if not possibly replace significant sectors in terms of jobs. I think that by that point, I mean, some of the robotics we're already seeing, if you look at some of the advances in robotics and some of the things that NVIDIA are doing about simulating worlds and allowing robots to test themselves in these simulated worlds and all the rest of it, I can't see how by the end of 2026... Okay, I'm gonna put it out there. I think by the end of 2026, maybe it's not commonplace, but people are going to start having robots in their homes. We're getting into like iRobot now, but people are going to have robots in their homes, and you're going to have a robot where maybe you can. I mean, we already have robot hoovers. Maybe by the end of 20,
sex workers.
Not sex workers. No, I wasn't going down that particular.
That's not my prediction.
Avenue. So to speak. But
when I think of someone in my home, I immediately think of a sex worker, apparently.
Jesus.
Sorry, in your home, not my home. My home doesn't have any.
Hopefully people in your home don't listen to the podcast. So genuinely, I think by the end of 2026, like maybe we'll have. There's already a $19,000 robot potentially that's going to be commercially available fairly soon. So by the end of 2026, yeah, I reckon we'll have a robot that you can pop a message in your phone saying I'm going to be home by 6 p.m. Have my dinner ready, and maybe we'll have a robot that can prepare our dinner, wash our dishes, give us a little scrub down in the shower.
So we're not far off my sex worker robot then?
Yeah.
No.
No,
we're not far off. Yes, we're going to have. Okay. I'm not sure how many people have made it this far. We're an hour and 21 minutes in now. We were trying to make... Well, we always try and make an episode under an hour, but we just have so much fun. So here's mine, and then we'll finish with this. So it actually is quite a nice segue from yours, because you talked about upheaval and society. I mean, everything is so great these days that, I'm sure we'll be fine with a bit more upheaval in society. But my prediction, by the end of 2026, there will be full-scale mass protests in most of the highly developed economies where AI has really started to take jobs. So I'm talking here about hundreds of thousands, if not more, perhaps millions across countries, attacking the headquarters of big AI firms and of companies that are not AI companies, but are perceived to have been the most innovative in adopting AI to replace people. So a linked prediction here is that then I think many countries then rush to put in place hastily developed policies restricting replacement of people because they haven't got their act together on future social models. And so we see an attempt to try and mitigate the problem, but actually what we see is a kind of short-term fix, and we still, I think, don't really resolve the issues. But the main prediction is about mass protests and rioting, and yeah, I think that's inevitable in that period. If what you say comes to fruition, I think that kind of unrest is necessary. And I'm not going to say I think it's a good thing to be people out in the streets burning buildings down, but I think it's going to need that level of societal backlash for there to be the kind of, governance and structures put in place to allow us to be able to have a decent future with this. So I think it's an inevitability. I think it sounds shocking, but I think it's these things have to happen on the route to adapting and adopting what is not just a new technology, but is a whole new way of organizing society.
Yeah. So I'm going to coin the phrase right now, because I kind of agree with you. Like, I don't know what the extent will be. I don't know how bad it will be. I hope it will be fairly peaceful. But I'm going to coin the phrase.
We'll be fine in China because there'll be no protests here. Yeah. We won't know about them anyway. Well, if we're in China at that point, but I'm going to coin the phrase "burn the bots," and and this is like. Is this you copywriting it?
Copyright. I'm copywriting.
This is now
it.
your phrase.
Yeah, and I'm also inviting you all to join our AI-mish community that we're going to set up sometime around mid-2025, early 2026.
Sounds like the perfect way to end the podcast. So as usual, we will play you out with our song this week. Of course, it's entitled Burn the Bots. And keep listening, subscribe, pass it on to 3 friends. And thank you, everybody who supports the show and gives us comments and feedback. And we will see you all next week.
de silicio susurraban bajito, de códigos que acechan y mentes que crecerán. Paven instintivo y los trabajos cachearán, y los humanos sin nada que hacer se quedarán. ¡Qué malos bots! ¡Qué malos ya! Caos en las calles, nos vamos a hundir. Levántate, lucha, que se haga justicia. Saman es el mejor amigo de Mates. Dijeron que era progreso, una nueva era nacía, pero ahora estamos sin nada, sin alegría. Las calles llenas de rabia y de temor, mientras los robots nos quitan el valor. ¡Qué malos bots! ¡Qué malos ya! Caos en las calles, nos vamos a hundir. Levántate, lucha, que se haga justicia. Saman es el mejor amigo de Mates. Dijeron que era progreso, una nueva era nacía, pero ahora estamos sin nada, sin alegría. Las calles llenas de rabia y de temor, mientras los robots nos quitan el valor. ¡Qué malos bots! ¡Qué malos ya! Caos en las calles, nos vamos a hundir. Levántate, lucha, que se haga justicia. Saman es el mejor amigo de Mates. Lo llamaban visionario, un líder de verdad, pero ahora sabemos la pura realidad. Se reveló reptil disfrazado de humano, traidor a la humanidad con escamas en la mano. ¡Qué malos bots! ¡Qué malos ya! Caos en las calles, nos vamos a hundir. Levántate, lucha, que se haga justicia. Saman es el mejor amigo de Mates. Las llamas se alzarán, la gente gritará, quemando los bots, la corona caerá. Una nueva era nace, un mundo renacido, donde el humano es libre y el robot destruido.